Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host today, Ian Fisher. We've got a really great show lined up for everyone, and we're going to focus especially on the state of California. Now, I know California gets a lot of attention, and we talk about it all of the time, but sometimes I think we overlook the opportunities that might be available for students at the California State University system, more affectionately known as the CSUs. We've got a couple of great alumni of the CSU system who are going to be joining us in the second segment for today's show. And they're going to talk a little bit about what their experiences were like when they were in college and how that college experience has affected their professional lives. But because this show is, of course, targeted towards prospective students who are looking to apply to college, we also want to come at it from an admissions perspective. And that means bringing one of our own experts from Bright Horizons College Coach to the first segment to talk a little bit about how CSU admission is going to work. So we've got Gabbi Tobias, one of my great colleagues down in Southern California, joining us today. Hey, Gabbi, how are you?
Hey, Ian, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here in 2023.
Right.
And of course, that means that we're turning the page to an entirely new set of students, those 2024 grads who are starting to think about their college search process. And let's imagine that you're talking to a new student who's just starting to research colleges and they want to know a little bit more about the Cal State system. And they've heard a little bit about the Cal State system. What's your initial just overview of what students can expect from that system and things that you would point out early on in that research process?
Yeah, I think that's a good start. One, the Cal State system is one of the largest, I believe, systems in the U.S. with over 23 campuses spread across northern to central to southern California. So you really got the pick and the luck of your draw. You know, no matter where you're at, you're most likely going to be in a beautiful area. That's just where California hands you, right? But with that being said, I think the CSU system offers a lot of opportunities for students. Their mission and their motto is to make sure that they can educate as many Californians as possible. And I think that's phenomenal. And I think they're able to do so also by making sure it's an affordable cost as well. So they are in the top 10 for one of the most affordable campus systems in the US as well too. And I believe over 50% of their undergraduates actually graduate with zero or little to no debt, which is phenomenal. Wow. And is something that, you know, they should be proud of, and they should be able to clap their hands from that as well too. Yeah. With that being said, educational wise, they're really, really big resources, you know, making sure that every student is connected to an academic advisor. They actually can't move forward in the process without connecting with the academic advisor earlier on in their first couple of years. And then they're also big experiential learning. So getting students inside labs, inside research, undergraduate hands-on experience, those are things that kind of help shape and round out your college experience. And so they want to make sure that they're pushing that really, really early as well too. Okay. And then also lastly, one of the things that I really love about it is diversity. So they are top in the country for diversity as well. So they are one of the most diverse campus systems in the US. And they really thrive on that, you know, making sure that they're able to reach a diverse audience from low income to economic diversity, also ethnicity as well too. So they really do a good job at honing in on that.
That's a great summary. I really appreciate you starting with the conversation about cost and debt. You know, sometimes on the admission side, we focus so much on the experience and how to get in and, you know, how to apply. We often need our finance colleagues to remind us that there is a cost associated with college, but I appreciate you leading with that because I think it is one of those major strengths of the CSU system. It also fits within the overall California higher education master plan. You've got the UC campuses, which have a certain amount of funding per pupil. And then you've got the CSU campuses, and there are 23 of those. And then there's the California Community College system as well. When we're thinking about the UCs versus the CSUs, I want to come to a little bit later some of the differences in terms of applying to those two campus systems. But is there any difference that you can pick up on with respect to the experiential aspects of a CSU versus a UC for a student that wants to know, you know, I'm looking at Berkeley, I'm also looking at, you know, Cal State Los Angeles. What can we talk about in terms of potential differences just based on those two different systems?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences, again, I think Cal State's also really, really thrive and they really make sure to hone in on is that they're preparing kind of workforce ready students.
Hmm.
And they're preparing kind of those leaders for the workforce. And that's something that's really huge and kind of really big. I think you definitely get that for UC, but I think for some of the UC components, maybe it's a little bit more so academically driven versus CSU's is a little bit more so they want students to kind of experience the whole package. So they want students to kind of get in, again, mentioning labs, also making sure that they're connected kind of internships earlier on as well too, to kind of get, a bigger feel for that. I think also something that one of the campuses shared, actually Sonoma State, they are really big on criminal justice too.
Mm-hmm.
So they were saying some of the federal agents will actually come in, recruit students, help train students. Some of their professors have been federal agents. So it's really more so for those professors, they're kind of teaching and learning by experience, which I think is phenomenal as well too. So it's really something that they hone in on is really showcasing more of that experience side of it versus just inside of a lecture hall, which is nothing wrong with that. But I think if you're more so of a hands-on and a visual learning like myself, you could really, really thrive in a CSU campus.
I think that's a great explanation. And I think it's important for students to think about that explanation in the context of what they're seeking from higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
For me, coming from a family with a couple of professors, like I was just very focused on learning. I wanted to do academics to the max. But that's not for everyone. I think a lot of people might say, I'm going to college in order to be prepared for my career. I'm going to college because I want to get training for a particular job I'm interested in. And the CSUs do a really, really good job of that because they perceive that to be a big cornerstone of their mission. There's also just a great thing about the CSUs is that they're not all the same. Like they have radically different kinds of programs. There are areas of specialization. If you look at Humboldt State has great forestry programs. Of course they would because they're up in Humboldt County.
Right.
There's so much that you can see in terms of the diversity also of the academic programming at these different campuses that I think is really, really exciting for students to consider. Are there any other highlights that you mentioned Sonoma State with the criminal justice program, Humboldt's got forestry. Are there other things that really stand out to you about the Cal State system?
Yeah, Sonoma State also. So I mentioned criminal justice. Also something really cool is the wine industry. Obviously, you're in
I was
Sonoma.
hoping you'd say that. Yeah.
I know. You're in Sonoma. So
yeah.
It's really in the palm of your hand right there. And so what they really do now is something really cool that they mentioned is that they'll actually take in children from those who are working in kind of the harvesting and the crop area of the wine industry to really making sure that they're kind of teaching them the business aspect of it. So not only do they know kind of the agriculture aspect of it just from growing up in that area, but they want to make sure they kind of know the ins and outs. So hopefully, in the long run, they could, own their own wine industry or their own, winery. They can, maybe run one. And they can kind of know what it takes to be successful in that industry, rather than having to do the opposite side of it. So I thought that was really phenomenal. Cal Poly SLO, dairy sciences, right? You're right there in the heart of it as well. So they're really able to really hone in on that agriculture aspect of it too. On the other side of it, I think Cal Poly Long Beach or Cal State Long Beach as well, they have phenomenal performing arts programs. So that's something that they really, really honed in on, that they really emphasized was their performing arts programs as well too. So it's really diverse. I know one Cal State mentioned construction science as well too as a major. So really diverse, and a lot of students with so many different interests can kind of come in and really have, whatever they'd want kind of at the hands of their feet, which I think is really awesome as we're seeing a lot of people lean in towards other trades and other areas.
Yeah, and it's great to have, there are many students who want an answer to that question that makes them anxious, which is what am I going to do after college? And I think that the CSUs are really helpful in providing an answer to that question across a variety of different campuses. And so you've got this foundation of a really great system, and you know that a CSU is going to have a certain level of quality just by virtue of the fact that it's a part of that system. But then each individual campus is going to find the things that it's best in based on where it's located, other resources it might have access to. And so those are things that you can look for as a student. You're researching these different campuses. Now, this is ostensibly an admissions podcast. And so we talk a little bit about how students need to think about applying to these schools, likelihood of getting in, building a smart college list for students that are considering the CSUs and know that they want to apply to at least one, maybe more. Where do you start in helping them to understand how that application process is going to unfold?
Yeah, so I think the nice thing about the CSUs is, they have a pretty extensive application period. So starts October 1st, November 30th. So you have a good chunk of time to kind of sit down and apply for that as well. I think first, before we even start filling out that application, I really encourage students to research too. And really look into kind of what you said, what is it that you're looking to do and what may be a good CSU to kind of help fit that profile, especially with the application being a little bit more straightforward versus the UC application. I really say, if you're applying to just one, I guarantee there's probably going to be a few more on there that could be a really great fit for you. Let's sit down and let's start researching and, look at some of those options for some of those programs that you want to go into. So I think that's something to say, if you're just doing one or two, let's see if we can add on 3 or 4 on there to kind of help round out that application so that you're applying a little bit more broadly within that system as well too.
Yeah.
But kind of secondly, when it comes to that, again, the Cal State application, pretty straightforward. So one, the only thing that you really need to apply is going to be your high school transcript. Also, if you know your parent income as well too, anything like that as well, your social security number, household income, all that kind of basic demographic information, you're going to want to make sure you have that right on hand and kind of ready to apply. I also encourage, blocking out 2 to 4 hours of your day, over a weekend in the fall. It may not take that long, but just in that case that it does, you at least have that kind of time blocked off. And then, like I mentioned, having a printed copy of that transcript so you can mark it off and making sure that it's kind of fitting some of those areas when it comes to recording some of those courses as well.
Now you did not mention the word essay, and you did not mention extracurricular activities, which are things that I think people talk about all the time in college admission. Did you just forget, Gabby, that that's part of the process, or I certainly not. So why didn't you mention those things? Yeah.
So if you're applying to the CSUs, you're a little lucky, compared to some of your other colleagues on the other side. You don't have to worry about essays. That is not something that's included in the process. The CSUs are a little bit more numerical when it comes to really calculating and making those admissions factors in those decisions. Also, like you mentioned, extracurriculars. Now, there is a space, I do want to note on the application, there is a space where you can input your work experience or your extracurricular experience.
Okay.
But they're just doing it by hours. So you're not necessarily sitting there and inputting all the activities, more so looking at it kind of qualitative. And seeing how many hours per week or how many hours per year do you feel like you spend on these amount of activities? Because there are some of those CSUs, Cal Poly SLO, for example, that does take that into a factor when they're making those admissions decisions. So yeah, no, I didn't forget essays. That's just one really great.
You would never forget.
I would never forget essays, but that's something that we kind of say it's why it's a little bit more easier is you don't have to worry about those components as well.
That's right. Now, and I think one of the other things, and you were talking about, and I think it's really smart to talk to students about how to find a little balance and range across that system. If you're applying to at least one, applying to more than one is not any more work for you to have to do. I think it's also important to remind students that sometimes there are negative stereotypes or biases around certain CSU campuses, things that over many decades have been part of word of mouth around these campuses. And I would really encourage students to be thoughtful about how they engage with each of these opportunities and not just assume that because your mom's colleague says one of the campuses isn't great because of what they did 30 years ago, that still is the reality for these campuses today. Because I think there's a lot of really interesting and exciting stuff that's happening within the CSUs. And you mentioned all of the incredible strengths that the campus system have. You got to go back last fall to the CSU Counselor Conference. And I wonder if there are any other important takeaways that you would want students to know from that conversation as they're thinking about this system for the fall.
Yeah, something really great and beneficial that they share too is when I'll kind of talk a little bit more so in Paction. And just to kind of give a brief overview of what impaction is real quick, is it's basically meaning that they're receiving more eligible applicants than they can accommodate for.
Right.
But so they did announce some updates for that, is that there are also 11 out of the 23 campuses where there's no impaction or only program impaction only. So that's great and allows a lot more options for students to look at some of those. So Chico, East Bay, Monterey Bay is one of those that discontinued impaction for the fall of 2023.
Nice.
Also San Francisco State Kinesiology, Sonoma State Early Childhood, no more impaction as well too. So that's something that they, really make sure that they announced and, kind of made sure there was some of the bigger ones as well. Also, I mentioned affordability earlier on, but something that they're continuing is if your family income is $70,000 or lower and you are a family of 4, you will graduate with no tuition. So you won't have to pay any tuition. So virtually you graduate with no debt. So it's something that they're continuing to do to increase, again, academic and economic access to all students as well.
That's great.
And they also are going to announce real quickly a transfer program coming late 2023, they said. So be on the lookout. If you're currently attending a California community college, there is an option to where you can transfer to a CSU, similar to how the UCs are doing it as well too. So they said more info to come. Don't want to say too much, but that's something that all students transfer-wise can be on the lookout for too.
And that goes back to, I think the first thing you said was that the goal for CSUs is to educate as many Californians as possible, to provide higher education degrees to as many people as they can. And these new transfer initiatives and taking away impaction, I think really, reinforces that goal that they have for the system.
Right.
This has been a great just overview and introduction, Gabby. I want to thank you for going to that conference and being a leading expert on our team in this particular space. And there's some great reminders just in this segment about what CSUs have to offer people. So thank you for being here.
Of course. And thank you for having me.
Folks, when we come back, we're going to actually talk to a couple of CSU alumni about their experiences on campus and how they've influenced them in their professional lives. So we'll see what Gabby has said here and how it resonates with specific examples from people out in the world. Don't go away.